Hey everybody, welcome back. It's been a bit. It's Sunday again, of course, which means it's stream day. We had the holiday, and then you um, but yeah. So we're back today. I figured I would do just another gaming chat today. I didn't have any particular topic in mind that I wanted to crush. Um, but yeah. So I hope everybody's been good. Hope everybody's had a good holiday if you celebrate the holiday. And I need YouTube. Oh, anyways, uh, yeah. So, uh, let's see what's been going on since last we spoke. Not a lot. Let's see. My gaming group 2 weeks ago for my 5e game got a little further along in their years-long campaign. They're just about ready to face the sort of end of this arc, and we'll see how that goes because um, they should be able to take care of it, but I'm not so sure that uh, they're. I'm not so sure they feel they can handle it. I know that we left on kind of a cliffhanger with them running around, kind of trying to get things into position. They did a lot of pre-planning, but their course of action over the campaign sort of um, uh, invalidated a lot of that planning because, I mean, they basically formed a small army, and that small army was approaching the dragon's lair from the exterior on the outside of the mountain. But they found sort of a back door and have been moving their way up through the mountain towards the dragon's lair, and have managed to get there. But they are there with just the party alone, as opposed to the party and their small army of allies that they've accumulated. It's kind of cool because the allies they brought together are friends that they have made along the way, and so they are. But they've cut themselves off from them. Good morning to you, sir.
Hello.
How's it been?
I've been okay. Busy this week.
No. If I sound or look a little under the weather, it's because the climate around here has been so back and forth. It's just got my sinuses and everything
We've had rain and snow and back to rain, and now it's sunny. It's the same. It's spring.
Well, the way the wind is going outside, I expected to wake up and find snow on the ground, but no, it's just gusting. I mean, it's like the howling past the house kind of a wind. No, it's fine. It's clear otherwise, and it's not constant. It's like no wind, big old train wind. Yeah, it's like, but no, that just throws my sinuses for a loop, and then, yeah. So there's that. We did have the big hailstorm not too long ago that. For the first time in a long while, put water in my basement. It's not horrible. I mean, I get a little bit of trickle, I get small puddles.
Right, but still, it can lead to mold and all that fun stuff.
I don't have to worry about mold so much. My basement dries out really well because I have air conditioning down here and I have heating down here, so it's fully ducted for AC and everything. And I also keep desiccant bags around, so like all the ambient moisture in the air just gets yanked right out. So not too worried about it. I mean, the puddles that come in are dry in an afternoon. So right. It's I don't worry too much about that, but it is frustrating and annoying. The first time it ever happened right after we moved here, I was just like gut-wrenchingly heartbroken because I'm like, I have this cool basement and I had my stuff laid all out, and then it rained and it flooded bad. Like I lost some of my comics and stuff like that, because I had boxes on the floor and everything like that. And I got here and the basement was nicely sealed,
right?
No recognized, leakage or anything like that by the realtors. But then I found out that was a record, like 140-year storm that did that. And ever since that, I've been like, oh, okay, just keep stuff off the floor. And if it took a record 140-year storm to get rain into my basement and it didn't completely flood, I'm okay. And then occasionally we would have little trickles here. I mean, just general basement stuff, though. I mean, I did find this last time that some of the water came up through the middle of the floor, and it tracked along a crack in the concrete. So I'm gonna have to reseal my floor. Not a huge deal. I'll just do it this summer when everything's super warm. But anyway, I don't know how I got on that one. Weather.
Well, we were just talking about what was new and what was happening.
Yeah.
Hello,
Yeah.
Slan.
Hello.
Yeah, I mean, ultimately, this is my game space down here, so I guess it's gaming related. You can see behind me, I've got like boxes on the floor because I was moving stuff around to make sure there was nothing watery. The drawers are missing behind my thing here because my brother took all of my Dwarven Forge to terrorize his gaming group with.
Oh, nice. I too am gesturing behind me to.
I can see that clearly. I mean, you got to be blind not to see it.
Mar Hockman, I don't have a sump pump, nor do I need one. I have a sump drain, and so a good amount of the stuff. And the floor is slightly angled towards that drain, so most of the runoff goes to that drain. I don't have enough water in my basement to need a sump pump. I'm not low enough to where I get flooding. This is actually just seepage through the ground and up through the seams in the walls. But anywho, I was just talking to Grumpy about how it looks like in the newest compilation, retro compilation by WotC, that they're re-releasing Expedition to the Barrier Peaks for 5e. They've introduced some interesting art for it.
That'll make John very happy, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Well, I mentioned it to Slan because he had gone through the trouble of remapping clearer maps.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
And I'm like, hey, you'll probably get some really clear maps here now. And then while I was looking up that, I found this other guy who'd done VTT maps in full color for Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. I'm like, wish I would have known this when Slan was going through all the work mapping it out.
It's fine. I mean, I like, one of the versions of the maps I put out as a link into that video was plain black and white ones that I printed out to see how they would look on paper, and they look good. And I love those VTT maps you sent me the link to. They look great, but when you only have a black and white printer, they end up being very muddy.
Oh yeah. I mean,
they do have a print version, I think, available, which I didn't look at yet, to be fair.
I've snagged some of that company's stuff before. And they actually do periodic like freebies or a buck a map kind of thing. So I grab those usually. I'm not diving in headlong, and a lot of times they do daytime and nighttime maps for like exteriors, which is cool. So like you have a village.
They do some great stuff. They do some.
And I think they do have some of the just straight black and white maps. Yeah.
So one of the things is I do want to redraw part of the maps for when I convert the spaceship into a underground survival bunker for survivalists in my Gamma World campaign.
I haven't picked that one up. I really want. I actually got behind on the Goodman Games ones. I only have the first 3 that they did.
I don't think I'll ever play it. I just got it for completion's sake.
Well, I like them because I like reading the commentary. I mean, I see them very much for what they are. They are sort of a historical document. They got the commentary. You got every version of the module that was released. Like with the Borderlands, I'm like, like what 2 versions of Into the Unknown, Into the Unknown or whatever.
Let me count the ways.
It's also neat to see how they convert to 5e.
Yeah.
And then also the expanded material is a huge bonus because you can always retro convert that back to the old versions, like Expedition, or not Expedition, but Keeping the Borderlands. They did all of the further adventuring stuff, and Lost World, or Lost City, they really expanded on that one.
I think that's one of the things that makes those upgrades to 5e more than just minimal work. Let's try and extract as much money from the players as possible. It really, they provide actual content that's new. The new content is important.
I think Goodman Games I've never worried about them being let's
no.
extract money, as much money as we can. I mean, but I think their heart was very much 100% in the right place with those
Yeah,
books.
oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
But they demonstrated every time they released something. That's
Yeah.
what I'm trying to say here.
Yeah.
You're right. Two of the original versions of the module keep on the Borderlands plus the update.
Yeah, and then also you get the 2 versions of the Into the Unknown or whatever,
or In Search of the Unknown. Yeah,
In Search of the Unknown. Sochcanth is getting redone by WotC too. Lost Caverns of Sochcanth. It's in their new in the Infinite Staircase is their new compilation module.
Right.
Like the Yawning Portal was, and so in that one is Expedition of the Barrier Peaks and Lost Caverns of Sochcanth. Both of those are really big modules to try and stuff into an anthology.
Yeah, and I'm curious about what changes they'll make and how they'll sanitize it.
I don't know. I mean, I have Sochcanth. I think actually Sochcanth may have been released as an aside because they released it as a freebie on D&D Beyond, and so I grabbed it. And one of the things I really looked for was some of the encounters that might have been problematic. Like spoilers for an ancient module. There's the Merid Cave where you go in there and he's, like you get the little, exotic Middle Eastern kind of dwarf-looking guy and his harem girls and all of that, which seems so out of place in a dungeon, and I can't imagine any party not being suspicious of that encounter. Yeah. I know we were, but it's there. They kept it in there. I didn't read it like for detail, so I mean I don't know how much they modified it, but it's that encounter is still there. But yeah, Sochcanth is a pretty expansive module to try and just fit into an anthology. I think that might be why it was released as a freebie on the side, just to kind of give people a flavor. But still, Expedition of the Barrier Peaks is a big old module. I think that was one of the thickest modules they had released back in the day because it had the big book of pictures and it had so much going on, the tech, charts and all of that stuff.
People don't think of it that way, but it's one of the early mega dungeons because it is that big.
It's huge, yeah.
Oh yeah, and I love it. I mean, back in the day, we loved it. We thought it was just the coolest idea. I don't have the aversion to science fiction, but also I don't have an aversion to science fiction occasionally dropping into my fantasy or other stuff in my fantasy. Like if I found a 6-shooter in a dungeon and for a reason, I wouldn't mind. I mean, I could definitely see some wizard who's been plane shifting or time traveling or whatever having a revolver. I know one of the classic D&D party characters back from Gygax's group, who is now a god in Greyhawk, has 6 shooters.
I like if you're familiar with Clark's law, which is any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable from magic. Somebody did come out with the converse of that, which is any sufficiently advanced magic is indistinguishable from technology. So you can always, play with that. I find it can add to the fantasy in one way.
I mean, and Barrier Peaks was just a really interesting module. I think it presents an interesting conundrum for a party of fantasy adventurers. It's really sort of a Statue of Liberty buried in the sand kind of moment. Speaking of maps for your underground bunker, before you go through the trouble of remapping them, check out Dyson Logos' page. He has a redraw of Barrier Peaks that he turns the ship into a series of triangular wedge compartments.
Yes, I've seen that.
Yeah, it's a really solid one too. That's a solid one too.
Well, I did start on it. So one of the things I actually went to the trouble of doing is calculating how much an acre of land can provide food-wise, with modern day technology, because presumably, in 400 years, hydroponics will be able to produce about that much. And there's the air ballast section of the spaceship, which I can divide up into like 15-foot tall sections, and that actually provides enough food indefinitely for the several hundred people that would survivalists that would presumably have built this bunker and lived in it after, when the shit hit the fan.
That's cool.
And there's the other conversely interesting thing is I've looked up at the lowermost level, there's like a theater, with the seating and all that. And that thing is big enough to seat thousands, which makes sense if this is just one section of the spaceship, but all of a sudden doesn't for the underground bunker. So I want to remap this, keep the swimming pool, keep the gym area, but what?
Well, I mean, if you're going to keep the ground for that long, you're going to want to have recreation plus exercise. So
well, yeah,
very practical.
You got to keep the pool because you want people to be able to, the gym, the pool, maybe other areas, but reduce the theater section to be smaller to fit the expected population of such a bunker.
Yeah, I mean,
when the players arrive in the theater, it's playing Dungeons and Dragons.
Yeah, exactly.
I know there's that huge wilderness section on the ship too, which is where this is menagerie, right?
I'm planning to keep. The big difference I'm doing is, again, because some of the sections have really a huge space vertically between them, is there I'm adding a few small layers that are basically going to be hydroponics, which does add to some encounters, but they make for quick exploration.
Yeah, I figured that the big open menagerie area, the reason it was so vertically open is to allow flying creatures and just that natural space, the trees and all that. I mean,
and it's good for humans to have that.
In the context of a bunker, though, it would make sense because you'd have a park area where you'd be producing some extra air and people could go around and not feel so cooped up. And
exactly.
So it's a great way to convert it for, and you're doing this for like Gamma World, I think, right?
Yeah, that's correct.
Yeah.
Except right now, my players, they have a talent for not acquiring loot. Like I will seed loot a bit everywhere in the adventure, and that is exactly what they will avoid going to. So after 7 sessions, they have 1 hazmat suit, a flashlight, and a pistol with, I think, 8 bullets. And the reason they have that last item is because one of the players' first character died, and when they got introduced, I said, "Okay, I'll allow you one of these artifacts," and I gave her a choice of several artifacts, including the pistol, and that's what they chose, just to give them a bit of a boost and to help out. But they're so not ready to tackle that bunker / spaceship that I can take my time converting it and thinking about it and slowly working at it.
Sounds like they need a friendly NPC or something.
Yeah.
Here comes an NPC in power armor.
Yeah, exactly.
Hello, friends. You seem to be lost. Do you need a guide on this map?
What you should do is give them like a Don Quixote type power armor knight kind of guy.
Oh, that's a good idea.
He's kind of half crazy anyways.
Yeah.
But he's got this ancient
power.
Tilting
at the turbines.
Well, now I have to rearrange everything because they've managed to be wanted in Horn. 2 of them got arrested. The last session was running the escape from the forced labor mine, where the two characters that were arrested were sent, and now they just managed the escape, and now they're heading away from the barony of Horn, and so I have to rearrange a lot of the stuff from that module. I can replace it. Some things it won't matter if I put it elsewhere. And then I have to see how because the idea was that the bunker not only is that, but it was the headquarters for the Legions of Gold themselves. Because I feel that the headquarters in the module are a bit underwhelming in terms of how big it is for that supercomputer to start trying to conquer everything around it.
Yeah. I'm not too up on the module.
Yeah.
It's been ages.
Yeah.
But speaking of like retro sci-fi, I think I shared the link with you, but I recently listened to the audiobook of the old classic story Prison Planet.
Yes, I'm about 4.5 hours into it. It's great.
Oh, man. I was listening to that. I'm like, there's so much DNA for those classic science fiction RPGs in this story alone.
Yeah.
It's just, yeah. I was disappointed though, because I went on and I started listening to another one from the same era called Death World, and Death World is a term that's used frequently in science fiction.
The one by Harry Harrison?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the original Death World.
Yeah, and I'm listening to it, I'm like, so when did we get to the Death World? So far, all I hear is a bunch of bickering factions. I know there's a Death World 2. Do I have to wait till the second book to get
No, actually, there are 3 Death World stories, books, whatever you want to call them, and they're each set on a different planet, though the main character is the same. I don't know how far along it is, so I'm not going to spoil everything for you, but
yeah. There was another one I listened to recently that was pretty good too, and it was I can't remember the name. I'll have to look it up. But basically, it was on some water planet. Oh, it's a 4-Day Planet.
Oh yes, the H.B. Piper one.
Yeah, that was cool too. It's all done from the point of view of the kind of cub reporter and his coverage and involvement in a labor dispute on a planet where they collect basically the space whaling.
Yeah. There's I need to look up the title, but I love H.B. Piper. He's got a lot of great books. What I do want to mention is the Prison Planet was also released under the title Survivors, which I think is a little bit more appropriate.
Yeah, because I mean, Prison Planet is so tangential to what's actually going on in the story.
Yeah. Exactly.
Yes, they do get put there as sort of an Australia-style prison planet.
Yeah.
But just the fact that the story takes place over 200 years and is multi-generational it's in general terms, not to spoil much for anybody who might want to listen to it, or you sound like you're familiar with it, Grump Slan. There,
yeah.
I think Slan's read everything.
I haven't read everything, but I've
read everything that's ever written.
I just want to name Slan's
far from it. I know people who've read more than me.
You honestly remind me very much of my father-in-law when I first met him, and like. He had this science fiction collection that, you walk into the room and it's like, and he would just give me books. Fortunately, I don't know what happened to that collection.
I could visualize that. He's about to turn on. He said, hold on. And he gets a tape player to play the choral music. Now open your eyes.
Yeah.
My father-in-law was a great man. He was a very cool guy. Not a great man, but a cool guy. A great man. This makes him sound like he invented penicillin or something. But he was a very cool guy, very down to earth. Read science fiction and fantasy, was into video games and board games and stuff like that. He used to go to my game night with me with my buddies all the time. So he was a very cool guy. But yeah, his collection of science fiction. And it wasn't like all, like some people science fiction is like, oh, I don't have the really thought-provoking deep stuff. No, he was like, here's this crappy, pulpy stuff. Have fun.
Yeah. No, I find it's the more interesting collections are like that. You have the more serious, thought-provoking, books, but also, I have 1984. I have, all those classic books that we see of as being very serious. You also
need a little schlock to cleanse the palate.
And give me the ace doubles anytime.
The schlock stuff is where the gaming comes out of, though. If you really think about, like, one of the things I really loved about listening to Prison Planet, and then also listening to 4-Day Planet, was just, I'm listening to this, I'm like, I can hear parts of various sci-fi games I've played in the past falling into place. Whether it's a name drop of a particular weapon or piece of technology, or just a situation. Survivors or Prison Planet, it's very much Crash on Volturnus from Star Frontiers. Here's a world that's out to get you. It's it's super harsh. We got to survive. 4-Day Planet is it's a traveler scenario. It's it's a Star Frontier scenario. It's
absolutely, and also these books have great examples of how just one little line or two will show you how different things are. like in Prison Planet, like a couple of generations down, and they go, I can't believe that the first people who arrived here, our ancestors, used these bows that are so weak because it's a high gravity world. Everyone's now stronger. And the bows that the grown men used in the first generation are now used by children to learn how to shoot arrows, because that's how much stronger people are now. And they don't say people are stronger. They just say, yeah, we can't believe how flimsy these bows used to be compared to the modern ones.
Even the part where they figure out how to make gunpowder and actually figure out how to make muskets, but decide that they suck. And so they're going to keep using their longbows and their repeating crossbows that they invent. Also, and just little subtle things like how they end up beating the aliens in the end is not a matter of technology. It's a matter of how they adapted to the gravity.
Yeah.
It's just, it's just those fun little bits. And, the 4-Day Planet, it's a mystery. At the same time, it's a huge world build. You're learning all about the various life forms that live on the planet. And I can see, as I'm listening to this, that, the creature section of the module, you've got the big space whales that are in it's an ocean planet. So they got the whales that are under, big old, they just refer to them as the monsters. They collect a wax from them that is used for something. And then you've got these like tread snails that are a hazard that like get into their habitats and will, their poison is so toxic that if it gets on your clothes, you have to basically destroy the clothes, because even if you manage to clean it off your clothes, the next time you sweat really bad, it'll reactivate and get into your skin and leave you with lesions at least. It's like, and every one of these little critters is just like, I'm like, this is a monster. This is a science fiction creature section of a module where you get a new blurb. And, in there, he's got the concealed hand flamer that is also, it looks like a lighter, but if you push the different button, it projects a burst of flame instead of lighting your cigarette. And the comment in there, like, one of these days he's going to forget how they use that and fry his face. Cigarette.
Yeah. That's also straight out of James Bond.
Yeah, and it's when you listen.
That came before James Bond, but
I recently had a chance to. I'm not delved into Vance's books and stories much in the past, and recently I listened to one short story of Vance's, and within 20 minutes of listening to that story, I'm like, there's the exact layout for magic items in D&D and magic in D&D. It's so weird how it's like discovering the alchemy or the chemistry of gaming, listening to these old stories. And for me, I'm probably the worst read fantasy and science fiction fan ever. But
because you mentioned 4-Day Planet by Piper, and there's a great book for DMs to read of his. It's called Uller Uprising, and it's about basically aliens on a planet where humans are colonizing decide to revolt. Very straightforward thing, except he based it on an actual historical event, the Sepoy Mutiny in Bengal, where the locals revolted against the English. And if you read the story of that event and then you read the novel, it gives you a great template for how to take real historical events and then change them for your fantasy or science fiction game in terms of what people did. And I don't want to give spoilers in case anyone wants to read it, but read both. Read, the Wikipedia page on that mutiny is probably going to be enough to give you the outlines. Read the novel, and then you'll see, oh my God, the perils it's just so close.
That's effectively what Martin did with his Song of Ice and Fire series.
Yeah.
Just retold his War of the Roses.
Uller Uprising is much shorter.
Right. Okay, fair enough. But the concept is the same.
Yeah, the concept, it's not new, but this one's a great, because the book is relatively short. It's maybe 180, 200 pages. And it's an event that, the people doing the mutiny, the revolt, the uprising were really, really clever. Did this one really clever thing, and he used that, similar thing, and then go,
Yeah,
and it's a
I do
great template for DMs.
I do a lot of that, like for Call of Cthulhu scenarios. I'll listen to some real world mystery thing or some odd piece of history, and you listen to that, and then you just kind of figure out, like, okay, now where does this become Lovecraftian or horror based or whatever? And it's really easy to tweak an already mysterious situation. Classic examples would be like the Dyatlov Pass. One that everybody like, oh no, Dyatlov Pass. What happened to these campers? Probably something relatively mundane, but of course it's been blown out of proportion. You can go with that and just turn it into something Lovecraftian. I know, like the Nahanni Valley up in Canada. That the Headless Valley. That one just screams. Even in the real world, it was like treated as a lost world. Like by the people who went there, like, oh, strange prehistoric creatures that haven't been seen for millions of years live here. And then headless corpses showing up all over the place, mysterious disappearing native tribes, or it's got so much real world folklore, and then people have actually taken that and turned it into Call of Cthulhu stuff, because so much of Lovecraft and his contemporaries, they dovetailed their creations into bits of the real world. Like, okay, we know them as trolls, but they're actually vormies, kind of a thing. So you can do a lot of that, or just take some little mystery, and next thing you know, it's Lovecraftian Cthulhu. Lots of folks showing up. We got Geek and RPG Grandma. We have Mara Hockman had shown up a bit ago. Dirty History and Hobbies. Doom Driver. And some guy named Mage's Musing.
Yeah, that guy. I know, he keeps showing up.
So how are your games going, Sean?
Pretty good. OSC is still on hiatus. We haven't played since November, so the recaps are all caught up. So the last one that was posted last month is it. But Night Below is back. I'm now 6 episodes behind. We just played yesterday, so that was the 6th. And that was interesting. So what has happened, I realized as I was looking at my calendar, in-game calendar, not real-life calendar, and I realized the year was, because it's set in Forgotten Realms, the year was 1358. And I'm like, oh, because that's the time of troubles, canonically. Right? And I'm like, do I have the time of troubles happen, or do I just wave it away? I'm like, what the hell? Let's throw it in on top of the adventure. So they got to the 15th of Kythorn, equivalent of June, and that's when Ao casts down the god. So the time of troubles happens. So the cleric was depowered mid-session.
Oh, damn.
And the paladins were semi-depowered, and it was a matter of, okay, so they're just figuring what's going on. One player knew he had read it, and so he saw what was coming. But so I've incorporated that into the Night Below scenario, so that's continuing on.
Was their character's name Cassandra? No one listened to them?
Yeah, no.
I just see everybody looking at the cleric.
Yeah, this was a meta reference. The player knew the character.
It's like, why have you been multi-classing into fighter for 2 levels? Because I know the date.
I know the date. Yeah. So yeah, it finally happened. So I incorporated that. We'll see. The player with the cleric was slightly unimpressed. Although the way it's first ed, so the way clerics work in first ed is that they are taught to get first and second level spells through their own meditation, so that they don't require the contact with divinity. It's third and higher level spells they have to have contact with the divinity. Yeah. So, but what will also play out, which is kind of fun, because I was looking up the events of the Time of Troubles, is this is a cleric of Timora, and Timora actually appears and stays in Arabel for the duration of the Time of Troubles, and so I'm set in Cormyr near Arabel. So he will have direct contact with the avatar of his deity if he goes to Arabel. So we'll see how that plays out. I don't know what's gonna, how it'll actually work, but it's kind of fun watching them interact with that scenario.
Well, I'm glad that they are interacting with it rather than just throwing up their arms and table flipping on you or something.
And the ranger got level drained by a wraith, and he was not impressed. He's now 5th from 6th. But what was funny was because they tried to turn the undead to get rid of the Wraith, but it didn't work because the Time of Troubles had happened. And so I was like, ooh. So they've been owning the scenario. This is Team Good came in because it's a whole new group. The only player that overlapped from the previous Night Below sessions was Sean, who played Bob the Assassin. He's now the Ranger. So it's a complete flip of morality, and they have been dominating everything that has happened. The dice have just said, you're going to win. No matter how hard the situation is, no matter how rough I think it's going to be for them, they just steamroll everything. And I was like, yeah, okay, you guys are setting yourself up for a fall because the dice are going to turn and you know what to do. But it's like it is what it is. So that was fun. That was yesterday we played, and we're playing that every 2 weeks. So I've got to get my ass in gear and get those videos caught up. But the second one is giving me a little writing hiccup because the second adventure that we had, when I was breaking down the combat they had, I was realizing this is a perfect example combat. All right. It was like something that should be in a DMG because everything played out beautifully. And I'm like, okay, so I'm going to make that part of the video where I give an example of here's the step-by-step, at least the surprise element, because they got 4 full segments of surprise. All the different aspects were covered because one person cast, somebody charged, somebody did missile, right? So everything was laid out. So I'm going to make a little example episode of that. So that means I got to be tighter with the writing. It's got to be clearer, and I got to separate, where I've infused a couple of house rules to clear up some mud. But so that's basically it. And my 5th ed game. 5th ed is a funny beast. We talk about how 5th ed is easy mode, right? But I'm putting this third, 4th level average group through the Sunless Citadel, the Tales of the Yawning Portal update.
Yeah.
And they cannot beat the giant rats for the life of them.
Yeah, 5th edition may be easy mode, but it's also incredibly swingy at times.
It can be. And like there's
especially in cases of where action economy is against the party. That's why that goblin encounter in Phandelver is so nasty.
Yeah, it can. But it's funny. It's like we've got 3rd and 4th level characters. There's only one 1st level character, but everybody else is 3rd or 4th, and they're getting killed by giant rats. And they're laughing. It's like, how are we losing?
It's because you haven't hit your super stride yet.
Yeah, well, they've had their super strides, but no, it's been interesting. While I'm still talking, and before I pass the torch, I'm going to share some RPG acquisitions.
Cool.
Just because we're talking RPG stuff. So a buddy of mine sent me this. My birthday was a couple weeks ago, so he thought this would be. I already had a copy. This is a 5th edition fantasy. He was like, but he met Chris Doyle and got it signed.
Oh, sweet.
So I actually posted that on the channel, but that was neat. He was trying to get me a copy of Beneath the Keep because I covered it on the show, but he couldn't find one. So that was the next one available by Chris Doyle. And I contributed to the OSE Kickstarter a few years back, and they did this little thing that I thought was neat. They gave one of the stretch goals was some PDFs of an adventure anthology as bonus. They decided that they're publishing them, so they put them up in their wonderful little digest size hardcover books.
Yeah, I saw those and was tempted to get them.
Yeah. I haven't even read through the adventures. I was like, you know what? I'm going to grab that, complete the Kickstarter. And while I was at it, I picked up, where is it?
And now you're just showing off.
Well, it was all part of the same shipment, so I'll stop it at this one. I don't know. I haven't read through it yet. Just a random little mini adventure that was published on Exalted Funerals. I think it's all it says is a old school role playing adventure. So it got a little bit of a setting, and I haven't even read it, so I don't even know what it's about. I just thought, you know what, I'm going to grab it just to fill out the package.
Yeah, I mean, and honestly, I mean, you can always take those and beg, borrow, and steal anything from them that you want to use, or use them wholesale. I mean,
Do wholesale, yeah.
All right, so Mar Hockman, Bear, welcome.
Hello, guys.
Hi.
And Cal, I saw you snuck into the comments here. Mar Hockman's been waiting patiently for like a half an hour almost.
Wow.
Yeah, we were in the middle of a thing, and so I figured I would wait till we reached the end of the thing. Slant.
The problem is that I wanted to talk about the thing.
Oh, okay. Well, sorry. Slan, do you have any gaming recently?
There was the Gamma World game Friday. I had something with family yesterday, so I missed the OSE game, but otherwise, that's about it. I'm thinking of starting a new game. I need to convince someone who showed some interest in gaming, but may not be into the long-term commitments. So I need to and has never gamed before. So I need to figure out, something relatively short to lure them in.
Cool. I know not tomorrow, but the week after that we have by the sword again. So
Yeah,
that'll be cool.
which I'm looking forward to.
Me too. Yeah, that that last Monday just was not meant to happen with two folks having issues and then me having tornado watch all night.
Yeah.
So yeah. Fun. Bear, you have a thing going on?
Well, tomorrow night I've got my Monday night Palladium Fantasy group, and then Tuesday night we're either doing Sojourner or the Sojourner crowd's going to do a little heroic just for fun. We'll see. They haven't finished deciding in the Discord yet what we want to do. And then Thursday night, Cody's game. So that's going to be fun. We haven't played that for a while, so it'll be fun to pick that up. And then Saturday, it's the YouTuber Palladium monthly game. So I got a busy damn week ahead of me.
Well, the thing I was specifically mentioning or alluding to was you bringing a great new game to the scene. So, I mean, Heroic looks awesome. I haven't been interacting much on it, but I've been looking and watching and following, and I'm digging it. So,
thank you.
So before we continue on to anything else, Mar Hockman, you said you had something you wanted to say about the sci-fi stuff we were talking about.
Well, specifically what Slan was talking about with players missing the loot that he was intentionally seeding into the game.
Yeah.
I have a rather fond memory about that. It's like a guy I was playing with. As the GM, he had very specific ideas as to what he wanted us to do in the story. And it was kind of like someone was trying to write a railroaded story, except that the players couldn't see where the tracks were.
That happens.
And one of the things that I personally remember, though, is that there's this scene where we're fighting a whole bunch of skeletons. And he makes a point to say that one of the skeletons had this glowing thing on him, and that when the skeleton died and crumpled to dust, the glowing thing fell to the ground and was left behind. The thing with that, though, is that we completely forgot about that and just walked off.
Yeah, well, the problem with laying loot and stuff out that in front of your players too, depending on how you frame it, a lot of times they're not going to trust it. I know.
This particular adventure had a perfect example of that. We walk into a room, and the only obvious feature of the room is a treasure chest in the middle of the room. My personal immediate reaction is that's obviously a trap. Well, It was a trap, but he was expecting us to immediately open the box and be surprised when the floor collapsed because we opened the box. Thing is, remember what I said earlier about the whole railroady thing, is that to get to the next part of the adventure, we needed to have the floor collapse.
Well, that's a thing. I mean, there are some classic adventures that start with you dropping into a dungeon. Yeah, I know, I've had players pick up a valuable item and not trust it and never use it for adventure after adventure, even though it could have really helped their character. But they just didn't trust it, and they never took the time to go out of their way to figure it out or anything like that. So it happens.
Or the opposite. They pick up a random mundane item and think it's so key to the plot that they focus on it for the rest of the
session. Another thing I did in this particular one is that he mentioned that one of the statues had a gold plaque describing what the statue was. So I steal the plaque just because it's gold.
Yeah, and that's you're going to have loot goblins who are going to go ahead and steal anything that's not nailed down. That
rightfully so if they're playing treasure hunters.
Yeah.
I know. What was it? I think one of the, speaking of relatively mundane items, So I had a player in one of my games. He's like, I want, because he was coming in later on to the game, so I was allowing him, players who came in later into the game could start at the level equal to the rest of the players, and I would like have them randomly roll for some accumulated treasure, that would make sense for their level. And he's like, I don't want any treasure, I just want one thing. I'm like, all right. It's like, I want a bag that produces rocks, just mundane rocks, from pebble sized up to like, fist sized. All right. He made such good use of that thing. I mean, I felt set up.
So when we did the Gamma World game, when we started the campaign, I said, you're each allowed to choose one artifact of the ancients. It cannot be a weapon. It can't be anything super powerful. So one of them chose a spyglass, or binoculars, something like that. Let's say binoculars. And I set up some situation where binoculars would be super helpful. Did they use them? No.
Yeah, that's the other classic problem is players remembering the things they have.
Exactly. But what's ironic is that it's something that player chose.
Oh, yeah.
So you think, okay, they chose it for a particular purpose, and oh yeah, so that way I'll be a good scout, or I'll be able to, and they totally ignored it. Yeah.
Well, especially in your game, because you're relatively low levels as much as Gamma World has them for your game, and so they don't have a lot of stuff. So it's not like their binoculars got buried in this massive list of equipment and magic items.
Exactly.
Like a D&D character has been going on for 10 levels.
Yeah, exactly. And they started with relatively minimal equipment. They each had a knife. They each had another weapon, which could be a spear, a bow, a sword, or a club. They each had a shield, basic survival, backpack with basic rations and other basic survival gear, like a tarp, rope, but that's it. Very minimal. Their equipment list for each of them was probably 10 items or less, and they still forgot about their the artifacts that they picked.
Oh, hello, RPG Dad. Welcome. So Bear Quiet One.
What's up?
So how you been, man?
I'm doing fine. Tired, working a full-time day job and then a full-time night job of running games and preparing heroic and writing on heroic and working on heroic and heroic. So.
Yeah, as to say that.
Heroically working.
It's a heroic effort.
Yeah, I'm so tired, you guys. Like, I'm so exhausted. The fact that I haven't flipped out on someone is an absolute testament to my psyche right now, because I am so on the edge every day right now.
Yeah, I anybody who can put together a game though, I absolutely am in awe of. I mean, I've looked at it, I've tried to do it, I've tried to whether it's miniatures games or RPGs, and it's such a daunting task. I mean, to the point where if I'm going to release anything anymore, I'm looking at more like kind of the low key indie scene, because you can kind of get away with a little bit less than people expect for the more high end. Indie stuff. Like all my miniature games I had planned died on the vine as soon as I realized how much the cost of sculpts had gone up.
It's insane. I tell you, the hardest part for me is being nice to people who are asking me questions about the game that are clearly answered in the document if they just read it, and I have to resist going, RTFM, man, RTFM. Like, it's like, oh, here, let me copy and paste and screenshot that page where you can find that information and then re-explain it to you right now, because you just don't want to just yell at people who are giving you money, for fuck's sake.
Yeah.
Man, there are days where I'm like, really? Did you even read the document? Really?
Yeah.
Well, you set the bar for heroic quite high, and you're living up to it, but it is a lot of work and effort. And
thank you, Slan. I appreciate that. And I'll tell you why. Because people have said, why don't you just do something simpler? If you look at the 2 comics I produced, anyone who looks at them says, whoa, these look as good as anything Marvel or DC produces. And they're referring to the good stuff, not that garbage they produced today with just like some person they nabbed off of some Tumblr art thing.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, yeah,
Literally.
I want this to look professional. I want this to look good. I want it to look like the best it can possibly look like. So I've recruited a really good team of people to work with who are all capable of delivering those types of levels, and we're going to deliver it. Because why? Why do it? Listen, I am not a half-ass person. I am a whole-ass person. So I'm going to go ahead and be the whole ass. You know what I'm saying?
Mhm.
Yeah. So I got to ask, in your project, how much of your project staff was sort of just folks you knew or favors you pulled in or what? I'm curious.
100%.
So that's the other thing too. I mean, I believe you are one of those people who, like many, who start and do really high polished projects. And this is not in any way meant to as a diminishing of your ability or anything. There's a lot of folks who manage to pull off really good stuff based on just having accumulated people in their lives with talent and skills that understand the dream and are willing to work for that. That is a networking I once had that I do not have anymore. Back in the days of the miniatures, hello.
I'm not here. Tell them I told them to never call me here.
But no, so I mean that's always cool if you can pull it off. Especially again, you've probably seen it with the cost of art, and you said you mentioned you had priced out miniatures once, which is I felt bad because at that time I was like, those prices sound really insane, and then I went back and looked at what people are charging now.
Yeah.
And unless you want to find some nobody in Poland and really undercut the people who are really trying to work at it, you're paying 200 pounds, British pounds, for a digital sculpt.
Basically everything I did was basically the three artists. So I've got Oliver doing the main art, and then I've got Bonks and Ariel Medell actually is going to help a little bit for the custom art. These are all artists I've worked with before on Heroic or on other projects, so that's good. Or the comics when I say Heroic. My layout guy was calling in a favor from another publisher, and I'm going, hey, who do you recommend for layouts that's decent? And he gave me 3 names, and I looked at this one guy, and I'm like, wow, and I talked to him, and we got along great. So it's like, you're perfect for this. Awesome, done deal. My writers are either people I knew or writers other people recommended to me. So I've got like Chuck Rice doing one of doing the introductory adventure in the book now, and I've got these 2 other writers who've been published doing the extra adventures. It's all networking. It's all talking to people and showing them that you're not a joker and you're not a jerk. When it came to the miniatures, I talked to Americans. And their price, none of them could give me fixed prices. They were all variable prices depending on how annoyed they were or how much work it was per miniature. And it's like, I'm sorry, I don't work that way. I work
That's
in
how
a
the
world.
industry works, though, unfortunately.
Yeah, well, sadly, it's not how I work. So I then spoke to this one guy I've worked with before and talked to before, an artist from Brazil who also does 3D. And I'm like, dude, how much? And he goes, blah. His answer when I gave him the same question was not a paragraph of conditions, but blah per miniature, sir. That was his answer. 4 words. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh, hired. So hired.
Yeah. How much did he charge you by chance?
I don't feel comfortable disclosing the amounts with people, but let's say he beat the Americans by a third.
Yeah, that's the thing. I mean, you can find reasonable prices, but you are really going to have to dig harder, and you're going to have to sometimes resort to going to places where you maybe feel a little uncomfortable going to them.
I don't, because based on how much money I'm paying him versus the cost of living in Brazil, he's getting paid as well as the Americans would have gotten paid, right?
That's not so much a problem there, but I mean, like when you're delving into like the Eastern European sculptors,
that's a weird place.
It's a weird place, but also it's intermingled with a lot of negativity in the digital sphere because there's a lot of people stealing STLs and selling them as their own that comes out of there. And so you get a lot of that. I mean, that happens everywhere. It just unfortunately seems to be concentrated there. I mean, that happens everywhere. It's just unfortunately STLs are that sort of beast. Yeah. And I'm not even necessarily looking for STLs to put out on the market. I want to use digital for my it's for my mecha game that I mentioned because I feel like mecha designs where you're going to have variations on the design and also a clear lineage between designs. Like I've got family trees between my mecha designs, right? This led into this, kind of like in the classic mecha shows where you're like, this design led into this, and we got the full armor version, blah blah blah, right? That lends really well to digital because especially once you have your themes established, you can shrink a knee pad or make a knee pad bigger, and it's still relatively the same size. You can kind of build up a catalog of parts that you can tweak. So it almost needs to go digital because, I mean, hand sculpting every mecha variation would be so much more expensive. But at the same time, I want to go the digital route because I plan to have print the masters, have them produced as metal miniatures, or, and that's because I still like classic miniatures. STLs might go out there, but yeah, it's just the rates that I've been getting quoted.
You're insane.
And especially in the mecha sphere, because it's a much more specialized art. Like there's anybody, there's a million people out there who can do fantasy, right? Just all you have to do is look at my miniature factory and you can see a bazillion people who can do fantasy 6 ways from Sunday. Mecha, on the other hand, is a much more specialized skill, and I've been only approaching people who I know for a fact have a track record of making good mecha models or know their shit.
Yeah.
And anybody else I went to, I'd be like, all right, am I going to send you a mecha design and you're going to send me back some chibi bullshit?
Why is his head so big?
I don't need SD Gundam. I need
Yeah. Real fast, I just want to say, everybody in the chat, I just saw everybody say all these really nice things. Thank you so much, guys. Like, you have no idea how much the positive energy I get from the community keeps me going every day. Like, thank you. And for those who've asked, because people have asked, I want to say this again officially. You see that number that we've raised in the backer kit, and you're all like, that's so much money. I'm seeing next to nothing of this. This money is all going to artists and writers and people who are helping me bring this to life. At the end of the day, I've always said, if I have enough left over to buy myself a pizza and a beer as a celebratory dinner, that's my success. You know what I mean? So,
now, question. I mean, if you're willing to answer this one too, is a lot of your talent working basically on spec?
Well, they're working on, so the artists are working on getting paid, right? When we get the money, when we get the money in, they get paid. The writers are all the same way as well. In fact, all 3 writers for the modules all came in saying, normally I ask for half up front, but looking at your project and, the person that recommended you to us and all that, just pay us when you got the cash. We'll do it then, So
you're now being paid off again there. Because
that's the
other problem with Kickstarters is nowadays to get a Kickstarter going, you have to have basically a done project.
Yeah.
Because when I first started miniatures back in the day, about a decade ago, my first Kickstarter, which was a mess but still cleared, I ended up $5,000 out of pocket on that one. I was able to get it going just on some concept art. And I managed to get enough backers to make the project succeed based on concept art. My second Kickstarter, which was much more successful than the first one because I'd figured out my shit, it didn't help that postage changed a whole lot in the middle of fulfilling my first Kickstarter, even a decade ago. But my second Kickstarter, I still managed to get everything going just on concept art. And then after I got the initial thing going, I was able to get, and I had the ball rolling. My sculptor was able to show work in progress things. I did a third Kickstarter twice. I did the same Kickstarter twice, different versions of it, and it barely failed both times. That one, my sculptor was willing to work on spec with not getting anything paid up front. Did all this work, and ultimately I was only able to pay him a fraction of what he had put out. He was cool enough though, because we've been working together, say, pay me what you can, go ahead and have the thing. So I was able to do the release anyways. But out of $2,400 worth of work, he managed to see $700.
Oh,
So, Yeah, so it's tricky. I mean, you have to network, and I think actually that was the last bit of that I would get out of him.
Yeah, it's one of the things I've always made a very big point of is everybody gets paid, even if it comes out of my pocket. Everybody is getting paid for the work they do.
Oh yeah, everything he got paid ended up coming out of my pocket over time. But eventually, he's like, rather than just nickel and dime me, call it good. Because every time I would get some royalties from sales of previous miniatures, I'd be like, here's some money.
Well, and this is the thing, right? Like one of the April, who's doing the final edit and write on the game, and she's dove into that now. She's doing the first chapter of the book right now. I mean, we're paying her for her services. Obviously, we negotiated a deal, but she said to me last night, she goes, "I don't care about that." I said, "What do you mean?" She goes, "Well, she gets a piece of the profits after." She's like, this is, in her mind, she's like, this is going to be huge, and I'm going to make way more money off post sales. And I'm like, okay, you can believe that, and I'm glad you do, because I think we're going to sell all our copies in the backer kit, and then we're done. But you never know.
That's what's proven to be my problem. Like my miniatures company, everybody who ever wanted the miniatures got them through the Kickstarter, and the first range I ever did started getting new sales 2 to 3 years after the original release, and that's eventually people start to pick it up who've never seen it before and don't have a giant backlog of miniatures to make.
Yeah.
But no, so it's interesting to hear kind of the business side of things, because that's you see all these like gigantic RPG, like especially in the 5th edition sphere, or even in the indie sphere, these giant RPG projects, and they're so polished and done by the time they hit Kickstarter, or even worse, like the board games. I'm like, to the point where some companies, I'm just like, you don't need a Kickstarter for this, dude.
Yeah.
You're really just using Kickstarter as a pre-order, and it's confirmed that a lot of companies are just using Kickstarter as a pre-order system now.
Well, it's Zane was on my show last night from Dungeon Damsel, Zane and Bunny, and Sean knows them. He plays Star Trek with them, and they had a very successful Shadow Dark supplement Kickstarter. The backer kit, they raised $100K, all that kind of fun stuff. And we were talking about stuff like this last night. And one of the things I've noticed is, and you look at Shadow Dark, you look at any of the XP to level 3 stuff, or RuneQuest, or whatever his name is, Runehammer, or whatever his stuff. All these guys have successful Patreons and YouTube channels where they're getting money every month flowing into the coffers. Well, when you have that kind of capital available to you, you can afford to go out and pay for the polished art in advance to make your stuff look great when it comes to the Kickstarter, so people see it and they go, wow, I want that, and then they throw more money at it.
And they also have built-in backers. The people who support them are going to be the first in line to back the Kickstarter as well.
And they've also generally networked throughout the hobby a lot.
Absolutely. They know lots of names and stuff like that. So for me, I honestly do say, and I will not even remotely deny this, because Zane and I discussed it last night and we both agreed, if I hadn't spent 2 years building up my channel and my community and all that type of stuff, we wouldn't have had the success we had on this one. This one would have died on the vine, because I had built up, I've got over 2,000 subscribers now. Because I spent time building up this community, by the time it came to launch, we had a good, solid base, and we funded in the first 3-4 days. It was amazing. I never expected. I figured we were going to creep across the line at the end for the basic funding, and we blew it out of the water in less than a week.
There was no line. You just flew past it. You didn't
it was insane to me that we did it that fast. Yeah, I didn't get to do... Yeah. We had a joke, Victor Gorchev and I both launched on the same day, and we were joking about it, which is you see all these Kickstarters and conferences, they go, backed in the first 3 hours, backed in the first 10 minutes. And then mine was like under 72 hours. I wanted to put a thing on mine that said backed in a reasonable amount of time.
I will say with mine, the one that I mentioned that failed twice. And what was really annoying is I could see that it failed for the lack of 2 backers.
Wow.
And unfortunately, Kickstarter doesn't give you any money.
Yep.
Not 100%. There have been times, in fact, I almost kicked myself for not going in and just backing the project myself.
Well, we did that on Heroic, the first issue. We were
I'll just go ahead and or have a friend I'll give you $50.
No, that's literally on the first Heroic. We were halfway through the Kickstarter and we were down $1,500 or something from getting the thing, and a buddy of mine who had some cash went, all right, we're getting you over the line. Let's get this done. And he just went in, boom, and brought us over the line. And then that encouraged other people to jump in. And then we were able to sort of get him some of his money back for jumping in so hard. We're like, here, man, have some of this back, you know?
Yeah, I mean, that's another problem with Kickstarters too, is the wait and see crowd.
Yeah.
And what they don't realize is that by waiting and seeing, they're having a detrimental effect on the project succeeding, because so much of a Kickstarter success is in the first and last part of the campaign.
Yeah.
We have a similar problem in just general miniature production, like miniature ranges. When you release, my area is science fiction miniatures, for like army-based games, for the most part. The problem you'll get in those groups is there's always a collection of dudes in the comments going, well, you know, I dive right in, but you don't have X, Y, and Z in your range yet. I'm like, well, fucker, I got to get there.
Yeah.
You know, the best way to make sure that X, Y, and Z show up is to buy A, B, and C. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
the way to make sure that X, Y, and Z never show up is to not buy A, B, and C.
Well, and this is the thing, and people don't understand with Kickstarter and BackerKit specifically, they don't charge you until the end of the thing. So people are always like, I'm going to wait till my payday. I'm going to wait for this. Like, no, pledge now, pledge early. They're only going to charge your card or whatever after the case may be, unlike, say, Indiegogo, which takes the money right away.
Yeah, Indiegogo, you get it regardless, though.
Yeah.
Whether
you get whatever money you raise. And the reason why they do that people don't understand is that if they charged everybody at the point of bid or pledge, and then it fails, they would have to then refund all that money to those credit cards, and that would cost them a small fortune in transactional fees. So why bother doing it? Just put a hold on the card or whatever. They didn't put a hold. They just charge you when it comes up.
Yeah,
much better way to go.
Yeah,
there's a whole episode I could do in the foibles of trying to create miniature ranges. For whatever reason, for example, science fiction military ranges, everybody wants every army to be exactly World War II armies.
Oh, really?
Oh, yeah. Like, you know, so my whole goal with my company, with Loud Ninja Games, the miniatures company that I have, was to make alien races. I didn't make any humans, because humans are an easy win. If I would have made 5 different human ranges, they would have sold well, because they continue to sell well. No matter how many human science fiction trooper ranges we have, they keep selling. So my thing was, I was going to make aliens, because we need more aliens. And then also, every time I make an offering, I have an internal logic and like rationale and kind of theme to them. Like, if you ask me why the Equine, for example, have little spines on their neck, I can tell you why they have little spines on their neck, right? But also that goes down to their technology. And so, like, I had one race, for example, that didn't have rocket launchers, and it didn't have mortars. And that was a problem for people, because they want everything to have the same checklist of weapons. I'm like, they had weapons that filled those roles, but they didn't have rocket launchers. They didn't have mortars. They didn't have support weapons. Never mind, they had big chicken leggy, egg-shaped walkers that accompanied them and carried the heavy weapons.
Yeah.
They didn't have a heavy weapon platform.
For some products, you really have to question what the people who buy the product are actually using it for.
So that's true. And still that argument doesn't hold up. So the argument is, if I don't have these, I can't make an effective army. But you can, because I've thought about that. I presented it in different ways. And I think this is the problem with, like, so my problem is that I have a vision, and I'm sure Bear can understand this, right? Having a vision for something, right? And then having to deal with everybody wanting everything to be the same.
Yeah. Oh God. Yeah.
Yeah, that's why we have 8 million D&D games.
Well, this is the problem, right? And this is why in Heroic I wrote an entire half chapter on what the Bronze Age is and what the Bronze Age represents and what I mean when I say Bronze Age superheroes, just so people can read that and get, like, this isn't Image Comics. This isn't 1950s silly Superman. Like, try and think in these range. And yet still, when people start talking about wanting to play and make characters, they start pitching me these Vertigo, Garth Ennis character concepts. And I'm like, dear God. Like,
Yeah.
no.
No, we do not have a belt pouch stat.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's no grimace talent where you just grit your teeth at them or something. Yeah, exactly.
Talk like this. I don't know if you ever caught there was a cartoon called Fairly Odd Parents.
Never saw
Fairly
it.
Odd Parents.
Yeah.
What was great is there's a character in there who's constantly referenced called the Crimson Chin, right? And he's initially depicted as sort of a I don't know my age as well. He's definitely kind of in the cheesier, but not quite 1950s cheesy type of a character.
Yeah.
But there's one episode where he keeps duplicating himself, and every time he does, it's from a different comic book era.
Okay.
And then they get to the 90s one, and they're having to like bleep out every third thing he says. He's like all heavily shaded with a giant chin and belt pouches everywhere.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh, nobody knows their comic books.
I saw a guy do a piece of art one time. I think it was on DeviantArt or something, and he was doing his character, and he did like the Golden Age version of his character and the Silver Age, which was mostly the same costume, a little more slick. And then he had the Bronze Age, which was a little bit grittier, and then he did the Iron Age, which is what that age is normally referred to of that character. And it was just a whole bunch of pouches with 2 arms sticking out of it. It was just like,
Yeah.
Oh, I mean, there's that old joke about Rob Liefeld where everyone has swords and wears pouches.
Yeah.
And he can't draw feet.
and he hides the feet.
I mean, I'm not a fan of Layfield, but I do agree with a couple of things he's at least credited with saying. I don't know if he's the first one who ever said it. I think he was called on how the anatomy of his characters wasn't correct. And he's like, this guy can lift a bus. I think he's allowed a couple extra muscles or something like that.
Well, yeah.
The other thing too is they talked about how his stuff wasn't drawn correctly all the time, and he's like, yeah, but draw the same thing incorrectly over and over, and that's just style or something. I think it's him who said that, and he's right.
He's
I mean,
very right.
and you know, whether or not I like him is beside the point, because lots of people did.
Yes, and he made millions of dollars. There's that picture of Captain America he has where Cap's chest looks really, really wonky.
Huge.
Yeah. Well, he finally got around to posting one day on some forum the picture of the bodybuilder he used as the model for that. And heavens to mercy, that guy's chest looks that fucked up. You know what I mean? Because the guy's just a roid monkey, you know? And it's like, holy shit.
Yeah. I know that.
Is that the Incredible Hulk was originally based on those kind of people who just have what is in real life unusual body proportions.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I think anytime you're getting into superheroic musculature, you're allowed to twist and bend on that. I mean, it makes no sense in a lot of ways that they would have a reasonable anatomy.
No, exactly. And this is one of the problems I have with the modern comics criticisms people give. They go, why do these characters all look like they have 10 hours a day in the gym? And then I went, because they're fucking mythological. They're not, you're not supposed to look at them like a normal person. You're not supposed to deconstruct them to that level.
They're archetypical. They are, they're paragons. They're not.
Yeah.
Unless, of course, the point is to deconstruct. Like you look at the way they're drawn in Watchmen, like Night Owl is drawn as pretty flabby, right?
Yeah, exactly. But that's the point of it.
It's just, the point of the character is like he's supposed to be just some schlub. Well, then fine, he should look like a schlub, right?
Bingo.
Yeah.
Well, that was actually a weird quirk with Watchmen, though, is that when you look at it from real world logic, someone who is actually extremely physically strong usually doesn't have cut abs. When you're talking about
they'll have a
works a real
core,
job.
yeah.
And you look at power lifters and they're very soft skinned. They have huge muscles, but they're not ripped like the Ultimate Warrior. But the point is as Alan Moore said,
I drew that a guy in Watchmen is that someone who is bulky but not cut.
Well, that's what the comedian is. The comedian is your average, 70s wrestler. You know what I mean? That's what he looks like. He looks like, Harley Race or whatever the case may be. But by the time you get to the 80s of comics, you get the Ultimate Warrior in wrestling, which is you get the Roid Boys. And as a result of that, that's the iconic look of a superhero, is this guy who you would think is probably on performance-enhancing drugs. Captain America is on performance-enhancing drugs.
Literally.
In the story, literally.
Well, I remember an early back in the day, I got like the Who's Who in the DC universe
Yeah.
comics, and they had the section on Batman was really interesting because they had a bit on his costume where his costume enhanced his musculature to where it made him look different than Bruce Wayne. It was also part of the defense.
Yeah.
But I can't remember the technology they used. Obviously, there's probably some PSB and some pseudoscientific bullshit in there. But I'm like, that's a good example right there too. Like, not all of this is necessarily in the guy too. It could be their costume.
Yeah. Well, so a buddy of mine used to have a real problem with Bruce Wayne. He's like, how could this guy started in the 30s? By the 80s, he's in his 60s. How could he be running around doing all this stuff? And then he saw a Ric Flair match where Rick was in his like mid 50s, and he went, "Okay, no, I totally could buy Batman now."
Well, I mean,
doesn't adhere to real world standards. I mean, how long was Kitty Pryde 15?
Well, yeah.
That's a different question, especially
even though every year they had a Christmas story, and every
Yeah. It's the MASH syndrome.
Well,
the war
with
lasted 4
Batman,
years. The series lasted 11. Sorry, go ahead, Mark.
They eventually reveal that he has a teenage son named Damian Wayne, which canonically means that Batman is at least 40 now.
Well, yeah, it's the Power Pack kids were kids for how long? Even though I know there was at least 2 Christmas issues where like one of them they ran into Wolverine.
Yeah.
Well, there's 2 reasons this happened in comics. Okay, one is Stan Lee, who is everyone praises Stan Lee, but if you actually write and read comics, Stan Lee was was anathema to good storytelling because he believed at the end of every story things should reset to 0 so that new readers coming in could just pick it up and run. That was number 1.
It's a good business sense, but
it's great business sense, but it's not great storytelling sense. And as we've seen, like even TV shows used to do this, and now we see the idea of episodic is gone, and we get into the more sequential storytelling, which they took from comics ultimately. Second reason, hang on, Mark. Second reason is after Crisis on Infinite Earths and all the times they reset the DC universe because it got complicated, Marvel did it first and then DC jumped on it and they said everything happened 10 years ago. And they literally picked this range of 10 years and then just continuing to this day run into history problems with the characters going, well, there's no way that character was doing that 10 years ago. Iron Man was in the Vietnam War. Well, now he was in the Afghan War. And it's like they just keep moving all the goalposts, right?
Yeah.
And I guess if you want to keep the stories relevant to your current reader, that's what you have to do. But, again, it makes continuity crappy, and it really means that you're never going to see the long haul development of characters unless somebody sets out specifically to do that.
X-Men has a unique problem there because of the fact that several of the characters in X-Men have backstories that are very explicitly tied to World War II and will not make sense if you change it. Magneto.
I don't know. I could see ways to do it. I'm not going to get into it. I mean, it wouldn't carry as much weight, but there have always been horrible people doing horrible things throughout the world since World War II. So you could always just rehome his origin.
Yeah.
Well, Magneto canonically had his powers as a mutant manifest when he was herded off to the concentration camp.
That's not
concentration camps.
They added that later in the story.
Yeah, and even if you go with that, concentration camps didn't stop in the 40s.
Yeah. Well, again, though, is that
people in Serbia and Croatia.
He has very specific motivations related.
But again, Mar, that was added later to the story. Originally, he was just Magnus, not Eric Leshier. He was Magnus, and he had a weird story involving Mount Wundagore and all the stuff going on in Eastern Europe. So they evolved the character.
Later,
So many characters start out without an origin. Even Batman goes on forever as just a costume detective with no real origin story. Not forever, but he goes on for a good while before he gets an origin story, and he uses guns. So early in his career, because a lot of times they're kind of punting with these characters. They don't know if they're going to take off, so they don't put a ton of work into them. They get a design. They get
a for sure.
Oh, they threw a lot of stuff. They threw a lot of stuff at the wall to see what would stick.
Oh dear
and
God.
sometimes what stuck is not what they expected.
I mean, with Detective Comics, it wasn't
give him a good
originally just Batman.
What was that?
With Detective Comics, it wasn't originally just Batman. It became that, but
Well, yeah.
Well,
Well,
I'm talking
Action
about the
Comics
character, not the
became
comic.
Superman.
I'm talking about the character, not the comic.
Yeah,
If you look in the comics, the original comics for Batman, he starts out as just the Batman, and he's just out there doing stuff, and he's got a pistol on his hip, and he's doing.
Yeah.
He's like every other pulp hero. He's just dressed as a bat.
But what I was getting at with that, though, is that the people writing it didn't know which of the characters they were writing that the audience would really, really like, and they dropped the ones that the audience didn't like.
Yeah, well, that's
okay.
That goes to my point that they'll add the detail later after they know what sticks.
Yeah.
So stepping out of the comics for a second, this is a style of writing that works really well. If you look at the series The Prisoner, they wrote the pilot episode and they knew what they wanted the final episode to be. So those were set in stone. And then they told every writer that they brought in for a script, you're writing the second episode of the series. So when you watch The Prisoner, every episode after the first until the last episode is supposed to be the second episode of the series, which is why he keeps saying, I've just arrived on the island. I've just arrived on the island. Mm-hmm. And that adds to the surreality of it all. It adds to the bizarrety of it. So it's a technique that can be beneficial, or it can go down the shitter, like with Wolverine, where we literally have how many origins? How many backstories? How long has Wolverine been alive?
Everything into his backstory too. Like, Sabretooth is his brother now.
That quote from Dirty History and Hobbies reminds me of something from Star Trek. Is that we don't see the times when it's actually an ordinary, mundane day. We see the times when something unusual and special happens. Not the entire month where they patrol the neutral zone.
Yeah, and same thing in comic books. We don't. We Spider-Man is out there patrolling New York all the time. We don't see the days where he's like, "Well, that was boring. I guess I'll go get some shawarma.
Go home and get some shawarma." Yeah,
exactly. I'll pick up a slice on the way home. Yeah, exactly.
I brought 3 cats down from trees and helped a little old lady to cross the street, and that was it for today.
I'm sure that's
what makes the 1970s Superman movie so good, is because that first montage sequence where it's him just arriving in Metropolis for the first time, and then all the stuff he does in one day. Yeah. And you're just like, wow. And that's why Kurt Busiek's Astro City had this amazing thing. If you ever read it, with the character of Samaritan, which is his Superman knockoff, and the first issue you read of Samaritan, he's always timing things. Everything he does, it takes me this long to go there, and he says 48 seconds, and it's only at the end of the issue that he reveals he's tracking how much time he actually flies, because he loves flying. So everything he does every day is basically him adding up, how much flying did I do today? But he has this one little moment where he saves a cat from a tree, hands it to a little girl, and says, I stop and let her see me for a second so she doesn't freak out. This almost costs a man his life in Indonesia. And it's like, and when you start thinking about that in Superman's terminology, no one could be Superman, because the amount of pressure that person is under and puts himself under to save as many humans as he can every day would shatter a normal mind, right?
Well, and also like
the heavy ideology instilled upon him by his parents and all of that.
So. There's also the whole writers have no sense of scale thing, and having a writer actually write things with a proper sense of scale, the audience is like,
yeah, but that's boring. That's the thing. Exactly. It's like realism rarely sells.
It sells for 5 minutes. It sells for 5 minutes is the new hot thing,
and then everybody grounded though. And I mean, I see what Marham is saying. One thing I loved about the Superman animated series, the Bruce Timm one, was they found that balance of Superman being grounded. He wasn't, it was the perfect balance. He was human enough that you could relate to him, but he was powerful enough that he was still Superman, but he wasn't like the ridiculous super invincible Superman.
And they continued that in the Justice League and Justice League Unlimited cartoons, where you get to that final episode where he squares off against Darkseid, and he just says in that line, he goes, I normally live in a world made out of cardboard, but I get to unload on you.
Yeah, that's a great fight scene too.
The first punch destroys every window of the city. For sake,
I watched that fight scene. I'm like, can the people who do the live action movies please study the animated fight scenes? Because one of the big disappointments been with all of the modern live action movies. It's always just punch backwards and forwards, and it's just the most boring thing.
Serious effort. I'm not sure they succeeded properly, but they at least tried.
No, Man of Steel.
Did you see? Did you guys see? We watched it on my Discord a couple of weeks ago. Did you guys see the Batman Superman Apocalypse where Supergirl gets kidnapped by Darkseid,
I've seen
and
that.
then they put the team together to go rescue her and all that? Holy Jesus! We were watching it, and all the fights in that movie. Not only is the animation amazing, but the fights are just so goddamn super. You're like watching it going, jeez, like the punches, the things, the hits.
The final fight between Supergirl and Superman versus Darkseid.
It's insane.
James Gunn has said that they're using the Superman animated series as the template for the way they want to set their world. So we'll see if he follows through on that.
Yeah,
good.
Cool.
He does good.
I mean, Gunn does good work. I've enjoyed the stuff he's done. I'm glad that he's kind of turned into he's become available to everybody instead of just becoming a Marvel guy or whatever. But yeah, I know that. Didn't he do the second Suicide Squad?
The good one. Yeah,
the one that was incredibly entertaining and fun and not a waste of my time.
Mm-hmm. I liked both. I'm weird like that. I liked both.
So I have to be fair. When I went and saw the first one, and I saw it with my family, I enjoyed it.
But the first one had a major flaw.
But it wasn't. I very much enjoyed the second one.
Both of them have failed at one thing. There's already been Attack on Arkham, which was this animated film.
Yeah, it was amazing.
That should be the Suicide Squad film. It's so goddamn good. Just make a live action version of that.
A close runner-up is the episode of Justice League Task Force X.
That was
good. So I'm going to take the conversation on that note all the way to the Wayback Machine in this episode, especially with Grumpy. It's like one of the things when I was listening to those old retro audiobooks and stuff, I'm like, why can't we get these movies?
Yeah.
Why can't we get movies based on these stories? Because even like Prison
or
Planet,
a TV series.
I have 20 years in the film industry perspective, if you'd like.
Well,
Sean will agree with some of the stuff I'm about to say.
I know there are reasons. It's unfortunately, it's one of those. This is the stuff we'd really like to have.
They're called studio executives, and they are the bane of creativity.
Oh, yeah.
Yes,
because like Prison Planet would make a great direct to streaming series because it takes place over 200 years of these basically castaways adapting to this planet with the ultimate goal to get off the planet and get revenge on the aliens that put them there. It's awesome.
Yeah. And if you wanted to do a TV series, you could actually stretch out the story and keep it entertaining with a lot of, personal drama happening in the families.
All the filler day-to-day life things too. You could add little extra encounters with the weather and the planet trying to kill them and the animals and stuff.
Yeah.
Kind of like Earth 2. except for not quite as weird and mysterious. But no, again, there's all these good stories, like you said, like the story, the Attack on Arkham, and all that would make great live action stuff. And
my favorite Batman film is animated, and it's the Mask of the Phantasm.
Yeah. Oh, that one. Most people will look at that one like, who the heck are these people? But it was done really, really well.
Yeah, I mean, it's a good movie. I think it's.
Oh yeah, I just remember one of my favorite things about that Superman and the Supergirl movie that you were talking about earlier. In that one, Supergirl is voiced by Summer Glau.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It's actually one of those things I was like, she could actually do a very good version of this live action.
No, she can't.
She
can't. She does. A, she's not anymore, and B, she doesn't have the corn-fed Indiana look you need to be Supergirl. Well, Supergirl is the all-American blonde chick.
I saw her as Cameron in Terminator: Sarah Connor Chronicles.
She was great.
She's a great actress. Character. It wasn't you're like when you're looking at Supergirl and other comic characters, there's a mold you're trying to fit into.
Yeah,
and voice work fine, but physically not so much.
Well, I mean, seeing her as a Terminator, shoving people through walls actually worked reasonably well.
Yeah, but she doesn't have the look. Supergirl is the thing. She made fine as a Terminator doing that. Yeah. But the point that they're trying to make, and I agree with here, is that Supergirl looks a certain way, and if you diverge too much from that, you're not telling the classic Supergirl story. You're telling your own Supergirl spin-off.
Well,
Look at the Stargirl
Supergirl
series.
from the Flash.
Stargirl, I enjoyed the Stargirl series.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry, go ahead,
I was
Sean.
gonna say, the Supergirl they cast in the Flash movie, you know, she
Ugh.
is not Supergirl. She did well. Like the
Mhm.
performance was fine, the visuals were fine, but it wasn't Supergirl.
But
Well,
Bear,
if
what
they-
did you say about it?
Real quick, I didn't hate that movie, so I'm like one of the few people who didn't hate the Flash movie. I thought it was quite entertaining and was entertained by the end of it. Second, it's always a visual lexicon you're dealing with when you translate visual characters. Now, when you're translating book characters, you can get away with a lot more leeway because people argue, but in this paragraph he described them as X, but most people don't give a shit. They just want to watch the movie or watch the Game of Thrones show or whatever it is. But when you're dealing with visual mediums, have you ever seen the movie called The One and Only with Henry Winkler?
No.
It's
No.
where he plays a wrestler, and it's Henry Winkler playing a professional wrestler. A guy becomes, but the character's based on Gorgeous George. So by the midpoint of the movie, he's got blonde hair and he's doing the whole look and everything, but it's still Henry Winkler. He doesn't quite look like the guy. You know what I mean?
One
Funny
fun.
you mention that, you know, like in the books they'll describe it. He's got such and such eyes and stuff, and very rarely does any of that stuff actually have any merit or bearing on the story, which is hilarious when people get all bent out of shape about it. That was a choice that the writer made because he had to fill in a blank.
But one
look
of the things that happens with written media, like books and short stories and all that, is that people imagine it, and then when they find out there's going to be a movie or TV show based on it, they almost expect it to be different than whatever they've imagined. Whereas with a comic book or an animation that you adapt into live action, you open it, you see it, you expect it to look the same.
Yeah,
You know,
Well,
which
this is the
like
thing. Okay,
that's
so
like
this
the only thing Sasha Calle failed on is Supergirl is she just doesn't look like Kara Zor-El.
So here's
She
here's
doesn't
something.
look like
When I was
Supergirl
when I
in
was
the
in radio
story.
school, they taught us this. They said something very simple. They said, "It does not matter how good looking you actually are. When your fans who've been listening to you on the radio meet you, they will not be happy with what you look like because you do not look like the image they've created for you in their mind."
Yeah.
I mean, I've run into that with people that like I know off the internet, and then like you know, I see a picture of them, and or you know, and I'm like, that is not what I expected you to look like. You know, it's like one of the I used to listen to a podcast, and you know, this dude and his crew, and hearing him, I pictured a very like skinny, kind of rangy guy, and I see him, and he's basically me. So he looks like goatee, baldish head. You know,
Why is it that everybody who in our hobby, like we hear their voices and we go, these are really good voices. Then we see them and we all look like Civil War reenactors. Like, what is that?
because none of us have chins worth it.
Something in the water, you know?
No, and you know, it's. I mean, the other argument, of course, with comic books too is that you know we have this, and actually you see it in basically anything fandom, is this adhesion and to this weird myth that we tell ourselves that these things have always been sort of static and never changed over the course of their lives and their existences. And then so we then see somebody change something and we're like, it's supposed to be this way. Okay, for like exactly the last 10 years it's been that way, but if you go back, you know,
To a point, I agree with
about it.
like some
Sorry,
of the
go ahead.
changes that they've made. Like, let's talk Batman for a second, because you say originally he was using guns and blah blah blah. But one of the things they added to him that I think is compelling is this no kill rule, right? And people are like, stupid, why would he kill? It's like because he's trying not to cross a line. That makes the character interesting. Depending on the writing, anything can go bad.
oh no, and that's a long-standing element of Batman.
Right, it's a long-standing element, but wasn't originally there. And people argue, well, he used guns, he killed before. And it's like,
Yeah.
but it's more
Barely
compelling.
in the span of the comics, you know, and there are times where the change argument is more valid than others, you know, but and some of the things that I'm issy about have happened in the comics and not just in modern comics.
So hang on. Here's a simple way to look at it. Because of the Justice League animated series and because of the change in the comics after Crisis, there is an entire generation of fans who grew up with Wally West as the Flash and
Oh,
John
Barry
Stewart as Green Lantern.
Yeah.
Wally West, if you add up the time, was actually the Flash longer than Barry Allen in real world years. But
Yeah.
every time they want to make a movie, they want to go back to Barry. They want to go back to Barry. They want to go back to Hal Jordan.
Then they
wanna go
make
back
him
to
like
Barry.
Wally West and not Barry.
And then he's not Barry Allen. He's just Wally West all of a sudden, but called Barry Allen. You know what I mean? It's so strange.
And then there's me who, growing up, I saw the old Super Friends, which has Hal Jordan as Green Lantern, DCAU, which has John Stewart as Green Lantern, and then this was about the same time as they had the comic books with Kyle Rayner.
All I have to say about Green Lantern Corps is what is up with Earth that it needs to have so many lanterns.
I know. Why does
Yeah.
Sector 2814 have so many bloody lanterns and the rest don't?
Actually, if you pay close attention, a lot of the lanterns that just get like one-shotted and you don't really know who the heck they were are actually replacements from the same planet that their predecessors.
Okay,
were
but
from.
at the
They
same
exist
time,
together. They
Earth
exist together.
has Hal Jordan,
Contiguously.
Guy Gardner,
Yeah.
John Stewart,
Kyle
Rayner.
Kyle Rayner, and then that girl that they've added in now, the Muslim girl in the new one, and then the guy that was they split the power between two of them.
Wait,
Why does
Muslim.
Earth?
That's
It's
what
really
it's
simple.
meant.
Why Earth needs more Green Lanterns than the rest. Superman lives on Earth, and as a result,
that's a good line.
all the threats from around the universe keep honing in on Earth because they wanted to kill the last Kryptonian. So Earth is kind of like, the comics are written on Earth. Earth is going to be a crossroads of the universe. That's just the way it
And
is.
if we really get down to it, it's basically simple business. We need churn to generate new interest, to generate,
Yeah.
because Green Lantern is, as a character, like any character, can stagnate over time. And one of the easiest ways to mix him up is to change the person who is Green Lantern.
Yep.
Oh, Dirty History and Hobbies makes a good point about Spider-Man, is that for a long period of Spider-Man's publication history, he was actually in his 20s as a married guy. And that a lot of people, that's the version of Spider-Man they see as the good version of Spider-Man.
If you came up
And-
like me as a Gen Xer in the 70s and 80s, Spider-Man hadn't been a teenager since the 60s. We
Yeah.
came into him as an adult. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, like
And
the old
Eagle.
Spider-Man animated series had one of the biggest plot points was Spider-Man getting married, and then after his wife dies, he finds out that was actually a clone of
Unless
his
you grew
wife.
up where
and he
Bear
has
and
to
I
go
did,
find
where Spider-Man the animated series had him going to college with Firestar and Iceman.
Yeah.
Oh yeah,
Or
that's
go back
another
to the 60s, the one that Ralph Bakshi picked up to have the second half of the old 60s Spider-Man cartoon. He was an adult working at the Daily Bugle as a photographer, and that's all they ever said about his life. You know?
Yeah.
So again, this goes back to that back to the earlier conversation about people's perceptions of characters. It's going to be based on their favorite. So really, as a creator of a movie or anything, you're effectively just spraying and praying and hoping the audience.
Yeah.
Because
Or you're Zack Snyder and you don't care what the audience thinks, and you're just going to do what you think. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And
And
that's
still
the
get it
other
wrong.
problem.
the
that
entrepreneur-
results in movies that the target audience is like, no, thank you.
What was that? Sorry.
Some of these recent movies, it's that they obviously have an idea they're going with, but the target audience that they're trying to target the movie towards looks at it and is like, no, thank you.
For Schneider
No,
or for
I think that
superhero
you have it
movies?
wrong. I think the problem is, Mar Hockman, is that the target audience for the movies generally is not the comic community. They're trying to get more.
Well-
they're trying to get more of the mainstream just
Well,
moviegoer.
that's kind of like the reason why they say no, thank you, is because it's something that they didn't like in the first place, and that they still don't care even after you try to pander to them.
Well, when you alienate your core audience for this elusive, mythical, expanded audience, you kill the base that the pillar is built upon, right?
Yeah.
And that's the big problem. Wrestling is the one, I always come back to this, but I do because Jack Kirby was a huge wrestling fan too. You can see it in his art. The whole thing about wrestling for the longest time, and now that Vince McMahon's no longer in charge of the company and someone else bought it, I'm very curious to see where it's all going to go. But Vince McMahon understood one simple rule when he was running the WWE, bless you, Sean, was my fan base that gives me hundreds of millions of dollars every year does not give a shit about this elusive expanded audience. So I'm not going to chase the elusive expanded audience. I'm going to continue to please my core audience and make hundreds of millions of dollars a year. Film executives saw Avengers make $1 billion and went, well, we need to make $1 billion all the time now.
Yeah.
That's a big problem with Hollywood, is that when you look at the old days of Hollywood, the golden era, $1 million was considered a big budget movie.
Well,
And then nowadays,
But
that's
different
like
level of
one
inflation.
actor's salary.
well, that's because $1 million was big budget because
Yeah.
bread
Yeah.
cost 10 cents.
I think the biggest difference is you had mid-budget productions back in the day,
Yeah.
where and low budget productions that were studio productions, not independent. So like a studio could take an actor, a new actor, a new director, a new cinematographer, new people, and give them enough money to make a small film that was low risk. There was a chance if they were good that this film would make
Take
them
off.
some money.
Yeah.
And then they knew, okay, this guy knows what he's doing. This actress is really popular with the crowd. Now we can give them a bigger, and you grow it gradually like this. And now you see, and this is not their fault, but you see these young actors and actresses that are thrown into these literally $hundreds of million productions. Tons of stuff are expected from them, but they don't have much experience before that.
Yeah.
And so a lot of them seem to struggle with the role they're given because they have so little experience.
Well, I
And-
think also
and
a lot
weird
of times,
dialogue.
I think a lot of times those movies aren't even counting on the acting to succeed, though. They're just
No,
counting.
I agree,
During
but
the
I'm just
bombast.
saying, I gave the example of actors, but it's also the case with directors. I mean, I really feel some of the people they've chosen to be the director of some of the superhero films, and they're like, this person has no experience directing
This
anything
person
like
directed
that.
did a documentary. What? Why are
Yeah.
they
Yeah,
running this
exactly.
film again?
200 million.
You have
Well,
these
and
from the
and also-
past that could do amazing things with very little. I mean, look at Cameron's early work.
Yes,
Mhm.
You used to work for Roger Corman.
but
Yeah,
there's
well, that's
a,
the thing. The Corman School of Hollywood doesn't exist anymore, and that's the problem. Because if you look at who
Yeah.
Corman worked with, he trained people how to be frugal and work around
But you
limitations.
look
But
at
we
what
already
made
worked with
Corman's
it.
like
work
Dragon Slayer,
He-
for example.
popular was that he was able to take, even if he made modest profits, he regularly made profits. He didn't sink a huge amount
his
of money
famous
into a
claim was
single
that none of
movie.
his films ever lost money.
Yeah.
I don't know
Yeah,
if that's
hard to
actually
do when they
true,
cost
but
as much as a
But-
sandwich.
But just to
Yeah,
touch
exactly.
on what Slam was saying, the new Dune movie is a perfect example. You've got all these actors, even Javier Bardem, doing this great characterization and speaking in these voices that sound different, and then you get to every scene with Zendaya, and she sounds like a chick from Brooklyn.
that's
talking on
exactly what I was
screen.
thinking of.
And you're just like, God, this girl is so miscast in this film, but
Yeah.
she's the hot ticket right now, so we got to cast her in it. You know,
I mean, I enjoyed the film, but that did stand out.
Yeah, same here.
Something that's
Sean?
important to remember about the older days of Hollywood is the way the system worked for actors was they were all under contract.
Yeah.
So they were with contract with studios. So it would be a case of, all right, George Raft is famous, for that because he kept screwing up his roles. But they're like, okay, we got Casablanca for George Raft, and so we get him first crack at the can, and he turned it down, and Bogey came in, but they were all under contract. And even when George Raft parted ways with Warner Brothers, they had to go in and negotiate to get out of the contract. But you had to do a certain amount of work, and it wasn't, the studios would often say, well, here's the big ticket, but they were already getting a paycheck, so they didn't have to say, okay, well, we got to give them $50 million to do this.
I also feel like
Well,
the
okay, but
studios,
so-
and I could be wrong, but I think the studios used to put work into their talent. Like,
here to touch on that for a quick second, because I'm a big fan of the history of the studio system, and what happened was the studio system got broken by stars wanting to be able to work wherever they want and get the biggest payday they could. So
Yeah.
they broke the studio system. The problem is that killed what was called the working actor, because what would happen is a guy like me or Sean would get hired by Universal or Warner Brothers as what they called a day player. And we would be guaranteed X amount of scenes a year on X amount of movies for X amount of money.
Right,
So we
and you
could
could
make a
have a
life
career.
and we could make a living and we could have a career as a professional actor. We didn't have to go audition all the time and fight for work. Once they broke the studio system, everybody got treated like they had to fight for the scraps on the table, and it turned it into this blood sport that the modern film industry has become. And now it's so out of control. We're at the exact same point where the film industry was in the 1960s until Jaws and stuff like that comes along and Easy Rider and changes the whole fucking thing. We're there again, and no one knows what. There's a movie called The Kid Stays in the Picture. Watch that movie if you want to understand the big switch that happened in Hollywood from 60s to 70s. It'll blow
that's
your
a good
mind.
film.
I
That's a
think
good
part
film.
of that is also the unions screwing things up, because the unions have been getting more and more authoritarian over the years.
Mar Hockman, good point. Bear, awesome. I appreciate it. Thank you, everybody, for coming by. But I do have to start closing things down because
No
I
worries.
have somewhere going to be at noon. And so, yeah, this has been a great episode. I really appreciate everybody who showed up. It's always nice to not have to be by myself on the screen. And so, Slam, Sean, thanks for coming in and talking gaming early on, and then the discussion on the business of making games and stuff. Bear, I appreciate that.
No worries.
And then also the general just fandom talk. I mean, it's good to have knowledgeable folks on here with me because in many cases I am not that guy. So, Bear, you always have lots of wisdom. Sean, as somebody who has been an actor and is an actor and stuff like that too, and Grumpy, your old classic knowledge.
Yeah, Sean, what's that like being an actor?
I don't remember anymore. It's so long
Me
ago.
neither.
All right, and so for everybody who tuned into the comments, I appreciate it. I'm not going to go through and name y'all. Folks who have channels on here is everybody. Sean has Mage's Musings, where he does retro reviews and all of that. Grumpy Old Slan, he's got a burgeoning channel where he's doing some pretty fun stuff, just looking through old stories and old video games and just generally introducing us to some gaming stuff we probably, especially in the United States, never had exposure to, this French language stuff. Bear, you know way too much about too many things, or at least you fake it really well. And his channel, you've got what, 2 channels now, right?
Well, the primary channel is at Zenith Comics Presents, which is my primary channel, and I have Bear's Cave, which is my ghost channel, but I don't do anything with that right now because the quality of ghost videos have just gone to shit on the internet.
Cool. And Mar Hockman, you have a channel as well where you talk pretty frequently about various Star Trek.
And some old movies. You've done some stuff with old movies.
It's a lot of things that are just like related to like storytelling for the most part, because I appreciate storytelling in video games, but also storytelling in TV shows, and the two of them. Well, Star Trek gets a bit of an intersection there a lot of the time.
Yep. And so lots of Star Trek for Mar Hockman. I mean, honestly, long story short. But he also loves Thundar. So you need to make more Thundar content because I also...
For sure.
I recently decided I wanted to do a review of what you can do with in a TTRPG with each individual Star Trek episode, and I realized that it's actually going to take 3 years if I do one of them every day.
That's okay. That gives you 3 years of
Content.
And I have to shut things down and go. Hard stop.
All right.
Bye, Eli. Thanks for having
Bye.
fun. Bye, everybody who listened.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.